Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1320A, and today's date is June 30th, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Central Bank Economic Structure is Now Being Unwound in Preparation for the Reset. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we're seeing a lot of economic surveys that are being produced, and they're all showing the same exact thing. Even the Conference Board survey, where they received grants from the government, and usually during the Obama term when he was president, that survey was showing that the economy was great. Now it's turned down. And when we look at the People's Survey, which is Gallup, we can see that the economy has been turning down for quite a while. People are looking at it saying, you know something, I really don't have that much hope that the economy is going to get any better, especially those individuals that have been losing their jobs and they can't find a high-paying job. The UMich consumer sentiment, well, that dropped to 95.1. This is the lowest in 7 months, going back to November 2016. And hope, well, that has collapsed. Now, people are looking at the economy right now, and we know there's been a lot of layoffs. We know there's a lot of stores that are closing, a lot of layoffs in corporations, a lot of contract workers are being let go. And we see at this point that people are saying, okay, I was let go, I'm going to go get another job, but I put my resume out there and I can't find one. What's going on? And after a while, people start to lose hope. People realize that I'm not getting a raise anymore, I'm not getting cost of inflation. And the corporate media, the Fed, they're all trying to convince us that, yes, the economy's still fine, it's still chugging along, but we see things that are completely different, where the economy, over a long period of time, slowly but surely has been deteriorating. And, of course, they try to come up with all these different explanations. It was the sun, it was the bad weather with the snow, it's too much ice, too much wind, and they kept making excuses. People are shopping online, people are not shopping online, and this is all they did. Now they've run out of excuses, and this is what always happens during a downturn. They try to explain it away with all these ridiculous excuses, and it never works. Now, something very interesting, the BEA came out with Personal Incomes and Outlays report, and it shows disposable personal income rose by $71.7 billion in May. Now, when people look at this, they say, oh, wow, look at this. People have all this disposable income, that people should be spending it. Why aren't they out there spending all this money? Now, when we look at this very closely, we see that, well, maybe it isn't as much as we think. And when we break it down, who actually got this money? Now, think about this for a second. If consumer spending went up like they said, and all of it was going to, say, Bill Gates and many others, that money would not be in the hands of the people, and they wouldn't be out spending it. And when we look at the wages and salaries, well, they were up a minuscule $6.6 billion or 0.08%, about 1% annualized. And we can go a step further and ask, how was the $6.6 billion in wages and salaries distributed? Because when we look at it, we could say, well, look at this. 80% of the $6.6 billion went to the top 5% of the wealthy. The other 20% went to the rest of the country, which means the rest of the country hasn't really received anything. But when you look at the numbers and when you hear the corporate media sound this off, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And when they look at these numbers, they say, people should be out there spending. Instead, they're hoarding. No, what's happening is the bulk of this is going to the wealthy. The rest of the people, they're not getting anything. And when you spread it among hundreds of millions of people, 20% of $6.6 billion, it's not that much. But for the 5% or the 1% of the 80% of the $6.6 billion, they're receiving quite a bit. And this is how they play these numbers, and this is how they manipulate what you're hearing. Now, what we are seeing a complete and utter breakdown of the system. And when we look at this, we can see that Illinois, they were facing a problem. And we know tonight there's a deadline where they're going to vote on this budget. And we can see already Connecticut is having this problem. There are 14 other states that are also in the same boat as Illinois and Connecticut. And Connecticut right now, well, they didn't pass their budget today. So the governor decided, well, I'm going to create an executive order, and he's going to control and he's going to take over the spending after the state failed to pass their budget. Now, what we are seeing is there's a lot of corporations that are leaving Connecticut right now. Aetna, the insurance giant founded in Hartford, well, after 164 years, they announced that they're going to be moving their headquarters to New York City. We see already GE. They, after 40 years, they are leaving the Fairfield headquarters and they're moving out of the state. There's a lot of hedge fund investment companies. They are also leaving. So we're seeing this in Illinois, Connecticut, and 14 other states. We're going to have a major, major problem as we move forward. And we can see right now, if there's any type of downturn or hiccup in the economy, if they announce that we entered a recession or if the stock market comes down, these states are going to collapse. The pensions are going to collapse. We are going to have a catastrophic event like we've never seen before. Now, out in Europe, the EU, ECB, they're telling us everything is fine out there. The banking system is absolutely fine. And we need to go back in time because there's new information that's out there that reveals just how serious a threat of disorderly collapse of Spain's sixth largest bank, Banco Popular, might have posed to Spain's banking system. Now, in the final days of Banco Popular, it was bleeding deposits at a rate of €2 billion a day on average. Now, much of the money was being withdrawn by, you guessed it, institutional clients, global mega fund, BlackRock, Spain's Social Security Fund, Spanish government agencies, city and regional councils. Now, at the same time, they were all withdrawing their deposits. Spain's economy minister was telling the bank's less privileged investors, including retail shareholders, junior bondholders, that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. Those that believed in what they were saying, they lost everything. Those other institutions that were withdrawing, well, they got out okay. And this should be a lesson to everyone. When you hear these government officials, the central banks come out and tell you, don't worry, worry. Run to the bank, get whatever you possibly can. This is when you know things are going to go south. Actually, you should probably be removing your funds now to protect yourself. This is my personal opinion. We're looking at examples that have been happening around the world, and it doesn't look too good. Now, when we look further into this, what do we see? Well, between the end of March and its last day of trading, Popular shed 18 billion euros of deposits, roughly a quarter of the total. Now, bear in mind that Popular was a smallish bank. Relatively speaking, it only had something like 140 billion euros in assets. Now, according to the FSB, there is only one bank in Spain that is officially too big to fail, and that's Santander. Now, Spain does have another 4 banks. Now, they're a little bit bigger than Banco Popular, and what we're seeing is that these banks would be okay to fail. They're small enough so they are able to fail, despite the fact that the insured deposits of those banks, customers would also not be covered by Spain's Deposit Guaranteed Fund, at least as it currently stands right now. Now, out in Italy, we understand that the government over the weekend pulled off one of the most unbelievable bank rescues that we've seen in modern times. the government committed 17 billion euros in taxpayer funds to bail out senior bondholders and depositors of the two Veneto-based banks. Now, what they did was they bend the rules, they made exceptions, and they allowed this to happen. And they realized, when we're looking at this report, that these banks and other banks, they are really hurting right now. And we can see that if more banks start to go, this is going to be a complete mess. And none of these banks are strong at all. And something else we need to know. Italy was one of the 10 countries identified by the ECB in 2015, unlike Spain, that wasn't complying with the EU rules on deposit guaranteed schemes. So Italy's banks right now, whose responsibility is to cover bank deposits, they're in no shape at all to raise like 11 billion worth of funds. They couldn't even scratch together 1.2 billion of funds before the weekend. So when this starts to fall, and we're already starting to see it, we see Home Capital Group in Canada, we see banks in Spain, we see banks in Italy, and from this new report we can see how bad it really is. When this thing starts to fall, it's going to be a complete and utter disaster. Now, we can see at this point the Bank of International Settlement put out a report saying, listen, there are major risks in the global economy right now. And they were talking about protectionism, they're talking about tariffs, they're talking about financial cycle risk for financial stability, and they made all these different points of how this entire economy can come down. Remember, the central bank of central banks, they want everything the way they want it. Now, what Trump is doing is he's unwinding everything the deep state, the central bank, has put together. And of course, when you start to do this, what they do is they tell you that everything is going to fall apart. I hate to say this, everything was going to fall apart no matter what. The reason why he is doing this with tariffs, with NAFTA, with the pipelines, with the trade agreements, with One Belt, One Road, all of this is being done to prep us for the collapse of the economy and to restart the economy. This is why he's making deals with corporations to bring back manufacturing, to say, listen, once we get everything settled, you need to come back to the U.S., you need to set up shop, you need to bring back workers. This has to be done, because if the manufacturing doesn't come back, if we cannot support ourselves, if we do not have trade, well, we're just going to be left out of everything. Because remember, once this system comes down, the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world. It will not be the reserve currency, which means that all these countries receiving the dollar, well, they're going to send it back to the United States. No one's going to be holding the dollar anymore. The deep state will not be able to pressure these countries into doing things they want them to do. Everything will change, which means that the U.S. is going to have to produce again, which means we're going to have to trade our produced goods with other countries, which means we're not going to get the oil that we're receiving from the Middle Eastern countries, which means we're going to have to get the oil someplace else. We're going to actually have to export oil. We're going to start to do the things that other countries have been doing for quite a while. And this is what Trump is preparing for. And of course, coming out of the corporate media, it makes it seem like it's the worst thing ever. Now, think about this. Back in the 70s, when there was no internet, when there really was nothing out there except for the corporate media, they were spewing the lie that we had a gas shortage. That's why you couldn't get fuel. They weren't telling you that we came off the gold standard, that we were going on to a new standard, which is the petrodollar, where basically there's going to be no checks and balances on how much the government spends or how much the Federal Reserve creates. So they made up an entire story that we had a gas shortage, that everyone has to chip in and everyone has to conserve and everyone has to do their part. This is what they do when we're moving to a new system, especially when they're in control. They make it seem like it's your fault. You have to do this. You have to sacrifice. And they're doing the same thing right now, but in a different way. They're showing everything that Trump is doing, that this is going to be bad for the economy. Just like during the Brexit. Well, if the people vote for the referendum, the entire economy is going to crash the next day. The whole entire system is just going to come down. It didn't happen. What they're really saying is if he continues with this, their system is going to be in trouble. Their system is going to be in jeopardy. What he's doing right now is for the best interest of the country, not for the central banks, not for the corporation. A lot of people are out there saying, well, he has Goldman Sachs people in there. He needs them there right now. First of all, many people think he's part of the Republican Party. He's not. Republicans hate him. He had to make concessions. He needed to bring certain people in there for the time being. Just like he kept Comey on board and then he fired him. He had to do this. Eventually what's going to happen is one person after another, they're all going to be removed. And as the system comes down and is reset, we're going to see a lot of Congress. Well, most of them are going to be exposed and most of them are probably going to end up in jail. And this is all part of the process. Yes, it would be great if we can just throw a switch and everything could be changed the next day. But in reality, in the real world, it doesn't work that way. You still are fighting against other forces while trying to change things. If you ever worked in a corporation and you tried to make a change, it's not that easy. It takes time. You need to keep pushing. And there are other forces in there that continually try to stop you. And this is what we're seeing right now. But when everything is all said and done, everyone's going to go, I understand why all this was happening. But one thing we do know is that we're heading for a complete system reset. This is why you need to get prepared. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.